Hello.
Hey guys.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Good.
How are you?
Doing well. Yeah, I'm Kestrel. Nice to meet you
Nice to
both.
meet you.
Yes,
I'm
nice to meet you as
Chloe.
well. I'm Stuart.
We can
Awesome, awesome.
put up here so it can go high. We're gonna get one box so that this can go higher. You can see us both better.
Yeah, definitely. I know it always readjusts, so it's like you plan it out and then
Totally. It looked totally fine when it was just the two of us.
I know, then it split screens and then you're like, wait, half my head's gone.
How are you today? Where are you? Are you in New York?
I'm good. I'm actually in San Diego, so I'm in Southern California.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, how about you?
From California and can't wait to go back again in New York, in
New
Manhattan.
York. Okay. Yeah. Well, this is so exciting. This is actually the first event of SFF's Fashion Horror Stories. So I'm stoked to have the chance to chat with you both. I feel like Thousand Fell is like everywhere right now. I keep seeing
Oh,
it.
It makes me so
I
happy to
love
hear.
that. Somebody
Definitely.
somebody on our team was like, "Is Thousand Fell a cult brand?" And I was like, "I don't know. Maybe, maybe sometime soon."
Potentially. Yeah, I see it on, people that I follow. I see them posting about it. I see it in articles. Like, I feel like you're having some sort of moment right now, it appears.
That's incredible.
Thank you for saying so.
It's definitely time for closed loop fashion. It's like this is
Absolutely.
the time. Well, so
Absolutely. Absolutely.
we'll tell you anything about the brand. I know this week is a circularity focus for Sustainable Fashion Forum
Hmm.
or however you want to take it. Horror stories, we can jump in.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things Brittany was mentioning as a great way to kick it off was to ask you kind of what your fashion horror story was that,
Yeah.
in a sense, kind of led you to, have an interest in sustainability.
Yeah. We actually talk about this quite a bit. I think each of us have more compilation of moments, and probably those watching that are in the fashion industry or in a consumer industry. It's definitely hard to pinpoint one specific moment.
Mm-hmm.
But to give my quick background and journey, I grew up in California, grew up in the Bay Area during, in the Silicon Valley during the height of the, internet bubble, and was obsessed with fashion. And my way of connecting with fashion, being from California, was Vogue, and like saving up my money to buy Vogue or Glamour or Harper's Bazaar or whatever it could be, in like fashion magazines and glossies. And I have a huge collection of every Vogue magazine for like 10 years. And so I was so excited to finally get to New York one day and participate in fashion and retail. But I had also simultaneously grown up in the Bay Area during kind of the initial eco movement and conscious consumerism movement, and just post Gore launching Inconvenient Truth, etc. And so I like simultaneously had this awareness and knowledge of behavior change and personal behavior and voting and local municipality, the effect local municipalities can and should have on behavior change or larger behavior change, like composting, recycling, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so came to New York, started as an interned at Vogue, like wanted to get into fashion. It's like, I'm finally here. And that was the first moment where you're just like on a photo shoot, helping coordinate photo shoots, but not really affecting change within a system, while in editorial. Ended up pivoting and deciding to try to learn to work on brands. And through that, there were a couple of kind of bigger experiences for both of us. We both spent the first 3 years of our career in and out of Asia and in China. And for me, it was really being close to the means of production. And I have one specific day where we took a trip, while I was at Gap. We took a trip to a leather tannery that we work with, and then a leather cut and sew, I guess, factory. But if you've never been to a leather tannery or a leather factory, the smell, it's so overpowering. I'm not vegan, I'm not vegetarian, but I have significantly cut back on animal products and meat. But it is a really sensory experience to be in any factory or any production setting, but really specifically leather. Like, have you ever like burnt your hair?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Hair in a hair dryer, like that is the smell of burning skin or burning hides. and when you're you know, garnishing it, etc. So really, really like kind of stop in my tracks moment. Like this neither feels natural, wholesome, exciting. Like it no longer feels beautiful. So that was a moment for me.
Yeah, mine's a little different. Part production, part inventory. So first, Chloe and I ended up meeting while we were in Shanghai, and the first company I ever worked with, you know, we used different material outside of leather, but it was a lot of synthetics. And so in the same factory setting, but like now you're talking about like plastics and heavy adhesives. And it's, again, it's a huge sensory overload. And like everybody's wearing masks, which now seems like a total in thing to do. And everyone should wear their mask. But like it was shocking to me that like that was sort of the protocol for even working the assembly line. And so realizing that like there was an issue with material and material innovation that was being used in footwear in particular. And the other thing that we had is that, you know, joined a company that had a bit of an inventory problem, and had way over ordered inventory that was like, that was seasonal, that we didn't know what to do with. And so for the better part of a year was tasked with like trying to find markdown channels and liquidation channels for inventory. And it was crazy. Like we were like negotiating, sending 14,000 pairs of these boots to like central Mexico and being like, this isn't like a great solution for like inventory surplus.
Right. And that's like normal, right? That's typical.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's not like the anomaly, right?
No. And so it's like, how do you rethink material innovation, and how do you rethink like inventory and like product development? And those were two really big questions. And our thought here too is like, the world doesn't need like another footwear brand for the sake of footwear brands. Like there's plenty out there. What it really needs is like true legitimate change. And that has to start at solving like the waste problem within retail. And having it not just be inputs, but like how do you turn old outputs back into something new? And so really focus again on that like closed loop system.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Interesting. Yeah, you come from, you know, a bit of a different angle, but at the same time, all plays into this idea of circularity. And I feel like for me, like I'm in and around this space, have been for over a decade, and, you know, words come around and they become like the it word, and all of a sudden everyone's using them. And one of them right now, I would say, is circularity. And I think that's a positive, but I also think as like a shopper or as an everyday person, that can get super confusing because it's like people are using it, they're dropping it, but it's like, what does that actually mean? Like, you know, how can you have like checks and balances as a shopper when everyone's using it? So for you and for, you know, Thousand Fell, what does circularity mean to each of you?
Yeah. It's super interesting you mention circularity being used as a marketing mechanism. We can get into kind of the future we see for labeling and certification. But circularity to us, you know, and Stuart would probably answer this, is like for like recycling.
Yeah.
And that's how we've defined it within the Thousand Fell brand. But what circularity actually is, you know, there's kind of three tenets, I think, and Ellen MacArthur Foundation does a fantastic job breaking this down. But it's, you know, first looking at, you know, circular inputs throughout your supply chain. Then it's making sure that the products that you're making or using can last and stay in circulation as long as possible. And that's the tenet under which resale and rental fall into circularity and are really important for building a circular economy. And then third, it's when that product is finally done, that it's been designed in such a way that there's an end-of-life solution. And actually, you know, designed in such a way that there is an end-of-life solution, designed for circularity, but also that there is an end-of-life solution. And I think that's one of the problems we're having right now is we're seeing brands come out with circularly designed products, but they have no plan to actually recycle that product or take it back. And that to me is a misleading marketing message. If you as a consumer want to participate, you've heard this idea of circularity, we've started to understand the idea of a circular economy and keeping products in use and fibers in use, but then that brand doesn't have a plan before they've gone to market. So that's kind of an uphill battle that we see for circular brands and circular retail in the next 5 years. You want to answer about?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, the way that we've sort of really simplified it is that it's old outputs become new inputs, right? Like you're diverting from landfill, you're diverting from waste to energy, and you're not downcycling either. Which is to say, like you take an old shoe and you turn it into like a like a track or insulation for a home. Like it has to be that you're able to take those old outputs and turn them into new inputs. And that's super important. And it's so interesting. Like we have seen every single circular shoe or brand in the world because everybody sends it to us because they know that that's what we're all about. And
Yeah.
I think everyone's like our expected response is like, damn it, more competitors, which is not really the case. We're really interested in other people moving into the space and continuing to develop the market. Like it's still so nascent. And so it's super helpful when big brands like Nike or like Adi in the footwear space come out and they're like, this is circularity and these are some design tenets that we're working into. And like most of the time, because supply chains are incredibly difficult to move, those larger brands are coming out with like white papers and strategy docs on it first with like goals and 5 to 10 year stretches to get product there. Still a great step for us and is really valuable when we go out with product to the market that's actually circular. And so people can understand how to engage with it, what it really means, and this idea that like when you're done with it, we will pay you money to send it back to us, which is great. And so like it's also helpful too where people do sort of kind of understand that concept with like municipal recycling, like glass bottles. Granted, like I don't know how much that happens these days, but there's like that image of like collecting old glass and like bringing it back and getting change for it. We're thinking of something really similar with retail and making sure that we can maintain the connection between customer and product and brand for that entire life cycle.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you talk about, you know, other brands coming into the space or bigger brands like starting to explore more circular approaches to design and to their kind of supply chain.
Yeah.
You know, when you're thinking of that, I can understand that a lot of times people would expect you to be like, oh no, like they're coming in my space. But the reality is, you know, I think so often part of the challenge is not being able to have the price point go down because there's enough of a demand for the materials, or, you know, are there other things that you think are beneficial having other brands or other people kind of in that space?
Yeah, a lot of it for us is and we've dropped this word a couple of times without diving into it, but it's market development.
Yeah.
It's you know, this is a new user behavior at the end of the day. And what Stuart was kind of breaking down is what makes the circular economy work. As you mentioned, material feeds and prices. But you can recycle anything profitably if you have enough of it and if you hit tonnage waste. So that's the first step. And I think Sustainable Fashion Forum actually linked today in their stories, and I read it right before this, an awesome overview on what is circularity. There's like the top 25 terms you know. And so, you know, for us, and within that, there's a list of commonly recycled fibers. And at the top of that list is polyester. So our first product line, we didn't initially plan 2 years ago when we set out on R&D to use anything oil-based or petroleum-based. We ended up launching the full line with rPET because it is a fiber that we can responsibly and cost-effectively recycle within the current system. And so that's why bottles, certain types of plastic, aluminum, and glass can be recycled at the municipal level because you're already collecting tonnage waste and there's a system. And so, you know, within that, you know, other brands coming into the space, it's not so much that we need them to make the cost of that good cheaper, but we need consumers to get used to actually taking something, giving it back to a brand rather than like a whole big bag of 20 different labels that we're sending to the Goodwill or Salvation Army and getting rid of as fast as we can and wiping our hands clean. We need to really have other brands kind of help us instill this behavior change, this consumer behavior change. I'm tracking my product's end of life. I'm thinking through where it's going when I'm done with it. I'm used to owning something on a subscription model, or I'm used to paying $20 extra for a material credit that I'll get it back. And so the whole new way to think about who owns product versus who owns fiber, and how are we actually building out that larger recycling network.
Yeah, definitely. Do you feel like the resale market is helping, you know, shoppers be a little bit more familiar with that? Because I feel like, you know, obviously, you know, resale is growing like exponentially right now, faster than retail. It's like has the potential to take over in so many ways. And I think maybe we're getting a little more used to like sending products in or sending them like through Poshmark or something like that, where you're like selling your own pieces and thinking about the fact that it will go somewhere later. You know, I think like a lot of us are actually thinking about the resale value of something when we make a purchase.
Totally.
Yeah, that's huge. And it really helps with customer behavior, right? Like rental and resale are big, right? And I think 10 years ago, if you had been like, hey, you're gonna like rent part of your wardrobe. People have been like, no way, I would never do that. And like companies like Rent the Runway, companies like Castle have really helped sort of power that and that customer behavior change. And just like in resale as well, right? So now people realize like, all right, not only does this product have another life, but like it has continued value. Like if I take good care of it, or if I decide to like sell it on these platforms, like there's other people that still have value and I can get money for it. And that's huge. Like I think for the longest time, the answer was you either buy something new at face value or it's donated. And like that was pretty much it. And so there are these other whole economies that are being built. And I think the difference with resale and rental versus actual like closed loop is that the input there for closed loop has been trash, right? It's like you're taking this like thing that was worth zero and you're now reassigning value to it. And I think that's huge. And I think like we're kind of standing on the shoulder of giants with everything from like direct to consumer to rental to resale to like kind of tap into that customer zeitgeist, but like it's definitely there. And our core audience is like the zillennial, that like Gen Z millennial customer that's shopping resale, and they're, contributing to resale growing 21 times faster than fast fashion, which is like, I love that stat and I hope it continues to grow. But they're also engaging with brands longer, right? So like they want to talk to you, they want to know where product's been, they want to chat with you when they own their product. And like that has never been the case for these larger brands. They've like sold product to you and then they'd be like, all right, we'll see you next season when we're going to upsell you on a new collection, right? Like that's not how customers are shopping now. And so we're really tapping into this this idea of like conversational commerce and building community.
And to build on that, and we were just talking to somebody actually right before this, an interesting conversation, but it's really similar. Like when you, the first user or even the second user, you're done with your sweater, or you're done with your shoes, instead of what we're trying to incentivize is, instead of throwing out, bringing to Salvation Army, bringing to Goodwill, contributing to textile waste problems in developing nations, you are thinking through at the purchase phase. I could spend, $30, $40, $50 more on this item up front, because at the end of life, when I'm done with it, it'll be worth $20, $30, $40, $50.
Yeah.
And I might, instead of going to a bigger fast fashion brand and buy something that's going to break or rip or tear and just become waste in 6 months, I pay a little more upfront so that it can keep value and stay in circulation, or a little more upfront for a solution like Thousand Fell, where when I am actually done with it and it's broken down and worn down, because everyday sneakers have a half-life. Most cannot actually be donated or be worn by a second user. There's an end-of-life solution, but I'll get paid for it.
Yeah, I feel like that incentive is huge. Well, I want to shift a little bit and like talk about the actual product more, but before we dive in, like, why sneakers? I think there's so many products, there's so many options when you could think about circularity. Like, why shoes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think there's a couple different answers there. One, we liken footwear to intimates. So they're like the first user is often the last user with most sneakers. And I don't mean for those of you out there that are big sneakerheads that are like reselling in secondary markets on like GOAT or StockX, these collector items. These are like your basic shoes that you're wearing 10,000 steps a day. So the first user is often the last user. They get worn through. And the solution is like you either donate it, and 95% of donated shoes like go straight to landfill anyway, or you try to resell it for almost nothing. It's like really hard to maintain value. So putting it on a closed loop makes perfect sense. The other element to that is that footwear is insanely hard to produce and to recycle sustainably. So like it's a very different product category than cut and sew. There are a lot of different pieces. There's a lot more adhesives. There are a lot more different material feeds. And our thought was, well, listen, like if we can do this, we can do just about any other product category. And so we've come in to like really nail sustainable production and kind of the reverse logistics around it. And that's everything from collection to product separation to being able to actually like trace and track, and then be able to incentivize.
And what Stuart was just kind of explaining is we call sneakers or everyday walking shoes high frequency basics.
Yeah.
So that's where he was likening it to lingerie, but they have a half-life. Our core consumer is buying 2 to 4 pairs of everyday walking sneakers annually. And the average American, I think, buys 8 pairs of new shoes annually. It's 2.4 billion pairs of shoes are sold in the US every year. And within that 2.4 billion, 300 million of those shoes get sent directly to landfill within the first year. So the problem again with footwear is that it wears down. If it smells even slightly on the inside, it's a sign of bacteria. It cannot be donated. If the back heel, the rubber on the back heel is worn down, it will affect the second user's gait. Can't be donated. Too dirty, rips, tears, stains, you name it. It's much easier to dry clean or mend denim or shirts and like have them stay in circulation. But really, footwear accounts for only 1/10 of all clothing production, but it's 1/4 of all clothing waste. So footwear is disproportionately wasteful. And then it's the 3 main component parts in footwear: leather, rubber, and plastic are really wasteful when they hit landfill. They're not biodegradable, and they contribute to chromium and heavy metal pollution.
That's it.
As well as microplastic pollution, which I've seen a few people asking about, and I'm happy to talk about.
Yeah, and I see some questions coming in too that is exactly where my brain was going, and that's like, what materials are you actually using in your shoes? Because I think the fact that you apparently can create like a circular shoe, I think is massive, you know, and I think for us as shoppers, it's like, well, what are you actually using? How is that really possible?
Yeah, I'll unpack that a little bit and maybe start by taking a step back. So the number one goal for us when we think about sustainable manufacturing and recyclability is making sure that we're innovating at or below $100, right? And this idea that sustainability, the movement traditionally has been really cost prohibitive for the vast majority of people to get involved. And we don't want to gatekeep with price. And so when we looked at materials, we were really focused on something that was cost effective and something that could scale. And so when we looked at this too, the idea was like, all right, so these are 2 requirements for ours. The other thing is we need sustainable input. So like, let's move away from virgin, let's move away from like non-renewables. Like we want to make sure that we're playing in that space. And then the other thing that we have to think about is like, all right, does this work for footwear? Because footwear is this super physical process. Like almost every single shoe is handmade. They're pulled over lasts, they're gone through heating and cooling chambers. Like this thing kind of gets beat up in the production process and the material. And then the final thing too is like, can it be durable? Or the second to last thing, can it be durable and hold up through wear and tear when it's used? And then finally, like, can it actually be pulled apart and separated? And so when we look at it, we look at, all right, what's existing recycling infrastructure look like, and what does existing footwear infrastructure look like? And existing recycling infrastructure is like a lot of rPET, so it's plastic water bottles, which is what a lot of brands end up using, and you can turn that into fibers. It's a lot of rubber, which, you know, you look at like the tire industry. So it's really important to kind of focus on these existing material feeds and be able to recycle into these. And so really it's rPET, it's rubber that we use, and then we pull out a ton of virgin plastic and replace it with food waste. So it's like coconut husk and sugarcane and palm tree leaves, and this can be pulled out and industrially composted and actually yield like good feed in about 60 to 90 days. So it's those kind of different feeds, and there's other feeds that we're going to be adding into. And it's this process of like, all right, is it at cost? Is it at scale? Can we currently like use it to make footwear, and can it be recycled without a problem?
Yeah, I think that's always the thing that's hard for me to understand, because I'm like such a tactile person. Is like, okay, so you take this pair of shoes back that is no longer like of use to me, or like I wore them out too much or something, and then you're going to take it apart and be able to, you know, put those inputs back into the circle. So like, how does that process work? Can you explain it to like, you know, a non-scientist brain? Like, how do you extract those elements?
So what Stuart was breaking down was kind of the design exercise we went through. And so 2 years ago when we started this, we actually started the design process with a recycling partner. And so it was, you know, we actually started with all cotton-based. And I'm seeing people, and I'm like really far away from the phone, so I'm trying to read them, but started the design process with all bio-based and all cotton-based. And ended up, because of strength and durability, we didn't want a shoe that would break within 5 or 6 months. We wanted a shoe that would last a year plus. Ended up landing on rPET. The reason we landed with rPET again was strength and durability, cost, but also it is one of the fabrics right now that can be recycled easily and profitably in the US. Questions about microplastic pollution. rPET is not the best solve. It is still plastic. But we feel okay with it being on the inner liner and within our shoes. We do not recommend shoes go in the washing machine. We recommend you take a white cloth and dab down the shoes with a wet cloth, not a white cloth. And we've actually coated the shoes with the stain resistant coating, a silicon dioxide quartz coating, so natural stain resistant and waterproofing barrier, so that you shouldn't have to wash your shoes quite as frequently as other shoes or knit shoes. That's just to quickly answer that. And the way that it works, though, pulling apart the shoe, the other way that we designed into the shoe is that we don't actually use cement. We don't use any heat fusing or welding. So a lot of footwear, if you think of like picture a running shoe or an athletic shoe, you'll have like plastic that's been like melted onto mesh, and you'll have like 10 different component parts, like including rubber, that all fused together with heat. We have not done any of that. That is ridiculously hard to recycle unless you're using a mono material. And it's all extruded from the same material, the same fiber, like TPU, and the entire shoe or the entire upper can then be ground down together. What we've done instead is we've stitched and glued together the shoe with water-based adhesives and stitching, so we can actually physically separate it, pull the shoe apart into different component parts without it impacting recycling. So if anybody's watching this and they have a 1,000 fel shoe, pull up the back of your insole. It looks a little different from a normal shoe insole. You can actually physically see the 3 different like materials. And you could, don't do it because you're gonna wear the shoe, but you could really easily pull them apart and separate them. And that's what we'll do at our recycling facility, is separate all the materials by hand. And then what we do is about, probably 50-60% of the shoe is our PET, the rubber outsole, and then a couple of other industrially composted food waste streams. Those will all go to separate recycling partners. So we actually have a rubber recycler, and someone else asked, can you put old rubber back into new shoes? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
But it cannot be entirely recycled rubber. So with any recycling feed, or when you're making kind of rPET, or you're making recycled cotton is kind of much harder at this actually. If you see somebody branding recycled cotton and they say 100% recycled cotton, they're lying.
Yeah, there's no way.
There's no such thing, and I see this all the time, and it really bothers me. Recycled cotton cannot be 100% recycled. Currently, like the highest standard,
50%,
it's about 20 to 30. And there's 1 or 2 companies that have new innovative ways to get it to about 50% recycled fiber. But like, there's so much to do on recycling technology, because even with recycled polyester, we're putting it back into a machine that actually, it's a bunch of blades. It grinds up the fabric and it cuts the fiber smaller and smaller. So every time a material is recycled, it actually loses strength. And so at the end, we have to take new or only once recycled input, or a little bit of virgin, depending on like rubber. We'll end up putting a little bit of virgin natural rubber in every single time. So it'll be part recycled rubber. So it'll probably be, 50 to 60% recycled plus virgin. So we'll be able to get roughly 70 or 80%, no, probably a little less. 80% of a recycled shoe can go back into new shoes, but it is not 1-for-1. We're not a single new shoe out of only recycled components. It'll probably be about 50% recycled, 50% new feed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Is that something where you see it shifting? I know like there's been a lot of work in innovation and with the tech in recent years, but is that something where you see like those percentages being able to shift? Like, do you think it's ever possible that, whatever you take to recycle, you could just recycle it without having to put new fibers or new materials in?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yes, but not in the next decade.
Yeah.
Or maybe not in the next 5 years. I don't know. Maybe in the next decade. There are some awesome companies out there. If anybody watching is super interested in recycling technology, so Evernew, EVRNU, awesome company looking at chemical recycling of fiber. If you chemically recycle a fiber, you can get the fiber to be stronger than the virgin fiber. The problem with that is energy. It takes so much energy to chemically recycle something, and so it's incredibly expensive as well. And so it's a barrier, or it's a balancing act. As Stuart and I met, and we were talking about, some people were mentioning, like Stuart mentioned, why cost? We need to get the cost below $100. That's not just because we want the cost below $100. No, it's because we need as many people as possible, consumers as possible, participating in a closed loop system to be able to capture back or recapture as much material as possible to actually make recycling work. We can't just recycle 1,000 shoes. We need to recycle 10,000 shoes, right? And so, we really need to remove the barrier to entry and change the larger system as fast as possible, and make this as mass, as accessible, and as normalized as possible as soon as possible. We'll start with mechanical recycling. and then transition in the next couple of decades to chemical when available.
Yeah, for sure. It's really interesting to get like more of a deep dive into, the actual process, because I think a lot of times brands somewhat overlook it. They just kind of make claims, but then you as a shopper, it's hard to really understand what that means. And I think it's so important.
Yes. One of the things we've been thinking a lot about is like, okay, when we first started talking about this 2 years ago, nobody was talking about circular. So our uphill battle was, well, how do we tell people what circular means? Now our uphill battle is everyone's talking about circular. How do we actually make sure that it's being used appropriate? And how do we, like, it's the same problem with the word sustainable. How do you know what's really sustainable? Is it sustainable to buy a recycled polyester underwear or recycled nylon underwear or recycled poly yoga pants? It depends. Like, what percentage of your consumer base can you get to install a guppy? Like, it's so complicated and convoluted. And so there are some great people talking about different certifications, different consumer facing, rating systems or ranking systems. We really love the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and B Corp, and, looking at working with both of them for this, but it will be, we need a better consumer facing education. You probably have more thoughts on that too.
Yeah.
We don't have the answer here.
Yeah. I think, kind of like backing up, I do think that the conversation around circular needs more voices, and then we'll be able to continue to solidify through like certifications, etc. Like, that's exactly what happened with like the food industry, and that's like a great example. It's like, I think the word initially was natural, and it was like all natural foods, and then at one point like Cheetos came out with natural Cheetos, and people were like, I don't think there's anything natural about Cheetos. Like, what are we talking about here? And so that's when like organic came about, and it was like certified organic. And so people were able to kind of begin really like boiling down to the things that mattered and that were sort of driving environmental impact, and then being able to bubble that up in a really clear marketing message to a consumer so that they can understand. But like, a ton of work still needs to be done.
Yeah. Definitely. I'm seeing like a couple more questions come through. So if people do have questions, they can drop them in the little question box, and we'll get to those in like 5 or 10 minutes. So we can answer as many as possible. I guess one of the things that I'm curious about is, I feel like we touched on it a little bit, but as far as like circularity at scale from an industry perspective, I feel like there's a lot of question marks, a lot of holes, a lot of, unknowns as far as like, is this possible for more brands to do? Like, it seems like you've figured out a sort of way to approach it, and it seems like you figured out this way where you can do it at a higher scale. So why are more brands not doing it? Number one. And like, what does the industry need for more people to jump on board, for more companies to be like, wait, I need to do this. This is a no-brainer.
Yeah. The why aren't more brands doing it? So it's a very nascent idea. More brands are going to do it. Tommy Hilfiger announced 3 weeks. We're like obsessed with Tommy, and he announced 3 weeks ago that he's going to move all of his brands circular by 2030. Nike released their circular design principle strategy guide. Really a lot of brands in the footwear space and the athletic side are starting out with circular products. So it's going to happen. We're at the precipice.
Yeah.
But it's going to take, I would say, 1 to 2 decades for all brands to move all supply chains. And the problem is moving legacy supply chains. We are at an advantage because as a nimble startup, we built our supply chain this way from day one. Imagine if you're a multinational company that is publicly traded, responsible for the street. A 60 to 90 cent increase in just material costs hits your bottom line when you're buying 10 million units and shipping them globally. Or if the current manufacturers and sourcers that you work with can't pivot fast enough, do you ditch supply chain partners you've had for 20 years in Bangladesh and India because you need to move to a new fabric supplier, or do you work with them to get them up to speed? What's the right way to move legacy mass market supply chain circular? Like, there's a human impact. And there's an environmental impact. And a lot of these companies, I worked at Gap, like for 4 years, we placed fiber commitments 5 to 10 years out. And we have people we've worked with to supply our fibers for decades. And those are part of your business. So it's going to be much, much harder for legacy brands to move, again, legacy supply chains over. And we get that. But at the same time, it's also not going to make sense for companies like Gap, love Gap. I always plug Gap. It's not going to make sense for companies like Gap to move their supply chain circular until the Gap customers are willing to pay up. It's going to be at least a 25% increase, as well as participate in returns. And we were talking about rental and resale, but like, what's going to get them to return and participate? And we're just at the precipice with this Gen Z millennial movement towards resale and Poshmark but really it takes a little bit out of the consumer to actually participate and see the value in a product at end of life.
But when you think about the cost, like, yes, it's going to potentially cost more for the brand, for their cost of goods, that kind of thing, for the ingredients. But if there's this massive like overproduction issue, can't we like divert that overproducing and take those funds and put that into like, like paying more for something better, I guess?
Yeah. So I've got a couple of thoughts on this. Some I think I'm qualified to make, and some are just kind of hypotheses. So like, I'll make sure to flag which ones.
They're not
which one I feel are like super bad. So I think that material innovation at like the fiber and mill level is much farther along than the average customer understands. Like, these guys have been at it for 10 or 15 years trying to figure out sustainable, because brands are coming back saying like, my customer wants something sustainable. What do you have for me? And so a lot of R&D is already happening, and like what you're going to start to see, and there's some really fantastic young startup companies that are doing some incredible things on the material innovation side with biofabrication and like natural inputs, and being able to get that to scale in the next 5 to 10 years. Like, I think that's going to also lower cost. So I think it's going to be less of like do we have to pass on a $10 to $15 cost to the consumer? I think that's an issue in the short term, but in the long term, I think it's going to change. And you're seeing a ton of demand, right? People are like, we need recycled inputs. And then they go to the recycled fiber and there's like nothing there. And so this demand is really going to begin building up supply. And I think that's going to, change the cost structure for the better. So I think that's part of it. I also think that like retail brands are not focused on reverse logistics. Like, that's just not their bread and butter. Their bread and butter is like building great product, marketing the hell out of those products, and getting you to buy and build into this brand world. And I think partners are going to have to come into space like Thousand Fell that are like building this reverse logistics system. I think it's super important. And I think that's going to happen. And we hope to kind of lead part of that movement as well, to make it much easier and much more affordable and like a very low lift for brands to kind of participate and get involved themselves. And that's on the roadmap for us. I think the tricky thing with like markdown and surplus inventory, and it's kind of the dirty secret in the industry, is that it's not like an accident that people are overproducing, right? It's not like they're like, they've been at this for like 50 to 100 years. Not like, oh, whoops, we made too many jeans this year. No, they know that there's a markdown customer. And they know that if they mark down a certain amount, that's doing incremental revenue for the business. And so what they're going to do is they're going to comp that markdown next year. So they're going to overproduce and then comp it. And so what you're getting is this business incentive where it's like, okay, to continue to overproduce and mark down inventory and liquidate and flood other markets with product. And like, they're going to continue to do that until it's incentivized not to. And the other thing that they have too is like part of the tax code, and we can talk about like where government fits into this whole picture. I'm like a very big believer that business is going to drive it, but that government needs to play a role too. That there's incentives right now to burn product waste energy. Like you have a surplus, you have liability, you burn it, you get a tax write-off. Like, let's shift that so that the liability is like, if you recycle it and you can recapture it, like we're going to give you an incentive for that. If you're diverting product from landfill and you're not burning product, like that's awesome. Like that's the tax incentive that we can set up. So I think there's a ton that goes into that question, where it comes from like how materials are scaling up, how recycling is going to become hopefully incentivized, and then making it easy for larger brands to get involved.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I see that we're almost getting to like question time already. I guess before we dive in, can you give us more of like the exact details of what it looks like to return your shoes to Thousand Fell? Because if people are just tuning in, I think it's really interesting and unique, the process that you have and how you are like incentivizing the shopper as well.
Yeah.
So there's what it looks like today, and then we have some exciting things coming out to the end of this month, and then later this year as well as early next year. So right now, if you buy a Thousand Fell shoe, you pay $120. The shoe is $100, and there's a $20 material deposit that will actually pay you back when you recycle. And the way you recycle right now, you email hello at, we shoot you a prepaid shipping label. It sends it directly back to our recycling partner in New Jersey. What we're rolling out with is a way to actually trace and track your product, and just scan the shoe with your phone, recycle from your phone, like really seamless. But really what we'd like you to do, and what we're building out right now at the kind of product LCA level, is to see how much energy, carbon, and water you've saved by wearing a Thousand Fell shoe, as well as over time, how much money you've earned back by participating in the closed loop economy. So that's coming. But right now it's super seamless. Like, you get the return label, you drop it off at either a UPS or USPS.
Amazing. I mean, you're a fairly young brand, right? So
Yep.
Have you had any shoes come back yet? Or like, how long do you anticipate having to wait before that process will start?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've had shoes come back. We've actually had about double than what we expected at this rate. So we started shipping shoes beginning of this year, of January, post pre-order. And, you know, we anticipated, based on kind of user research and kind of understanding, again, I mentioned our core customers buying daily walking shoes 2 to 4 times a year. Like, these are the shoes that you pay $85 to $120, $140 for, and you wear them 10,000 steps a day, commuting, whatever it might be, wear them to a dive bar on a Friday night, and they're brown. And so you get a new pair Saturday before work or before class, on Monday. And so, we've seen roughly 25% now, I think, of our very first cohort already recycle within 8 months. And we anticipate people will recycle between 6 and 18 months.
Wow. It's a lot quicker than I anticipated. But I mean, I come from I keep things for maybe extra long because I'm like, no, I'm going to wear it, or I'm going to mend it or something.
Well, it's really hard to understand that user behavior. Also, like, you're in fashion and you're wearing like a hot pink, like awesome shirt. Like, if you are someone that has like 3 to 4 pairs of shoes that they might cycle through a week, it's a totally different user behavior than the person who, like, this is my shoe. These are the shoes by the front door. Like, these are the shoes I wear Monday to Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah.
And there is, a huge section of the population that has like that. That's my shoe right now.
The other thing that I think is really interesting is, like, most of these products that come back are, I mean, they're not in bad. It's not like the shoe is exploded and like the outsole's dangling off. Like, no. They're just worn. And really what it is such a craze around keeping white shoes white.
Yeah.
Which is, by the way, so hard to do. And so that's where that like repeat behavior kind of comes in.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Well, we have questions rolling in. Let's start those so we can see if we can get as many answers from you too. Let's see. So, Snowbar says, I just launched a kids wear brand that's produced locally in Jordan using cotton, no polyester fabric. We would like to be as, let me see if I can add this for you. We would like to be as, and I can't see the rest of it. We would like to be as,
I don't know. I can't see it either.
As environmental and ethical as possible. Well, if you have Snowbar, if you have more context, maybe like just send through a comment of that for us and we can look at another question. Vibe Vibration says, how do you unincentivize people from still overbuying since it's recyclable?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Good question.
So it's the question is to kind of reframe it as like, since it's recyclable, how do you prevent people from treating it too much like a disposable? Where like, you're right. The idea is you want people to wear a product longer as opposed to just like churning through a new product. It's a good question. And I think a lot of it has to do with 2 things. One, keeping the product as durable as possible on our end. So our goal here is still to sell you a shoe that lasts for a long time, that stays white, that holds up to wear and tear. And so we've done a ton of wear testing on product. making sure that you
Mhm.
could wear it 10,000 steps a day for 8, 10, 12 months, and there's no issue. And we're on par with kind of your average leather sneaker out there, which has kind of been the benchmark for us. The other thing that we've done is we've built in like material innovation in the product with like quartz coating to make it stain proof and water resistant, because again, as I kind of mentioned, the trigger for sending product back isn't that it's like worn out, it's that it's just dirty. And so making
Mhm.
sure that we're keeping product white and clean. And then we also are, sending out emails and texts on how to keep product clean. And so keeping that kind of customer education, which is super important. And then we've done some stuff too with like insoles to make sure that the insoles last longer so they don't get blown out. So there's a lot that we've done around durability that keeps it away from like continue to have people like burn through product.
Mhm. Yeah. So I guess back to that snow bar question, they were asking about the zipper. So like what to do as far as zippers go when you're thinking about recyclability and like circularity, if you have any insight on zippers.
Yeah, I haven't been in the zipper space. Although I guess shoes are starting to have zippers now. So the way that I would look at it is you're gonna have to pull this apart. The zipper is gonna have to be pulled apart, unless it's made from the exact same material as the upper, which unlikely that it is.
It's like all TPU.
Yeah, and so
Mhm.
what's probably gonna end up happening is you're gonna mechanically recycle it, and it either needs to be RPET, so like a plastic zipper, or it needs to be
Actually, it's clothing.
oh, it's
Cotton
clothing.
clothing.
It's cotton clothing.
Yeah.
Aluminum maybe? Can you do aluminum
I
zippers?
don't know. I mean, the best thing to do with any, and there was questions in here about kind of big oil and plastic and recycling, what's profitable, what's not. The best thing to do is look into types of metals that are recyclable and recycled profitably in your region.
Yeah.
And then could you make a zipper with that metal?
Yeah.
Or would, like, let's say you're working on like blanking on the name of the top zipper supplier that everybody uses.
YYK.
Yeah.
YKK.
YKK.
YKK,
Like,
yeah.
Like, does YKK, again, a lot of this is, as somebody else asked, is the onus of designing for circularity and designing sustainability at cost on the brand? Yeah, but you, as a consumer, you would totally underestimate the role that mills and suppliers play in design innovation.
Yeah.
So YKK probably is looking into this right now, and I would probably contact someone there and ask about what are your solutions for recyclable zippers, or zippers end of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that there are some zipper companies that are doing like recycled PET, the tape,
Cool.
zipper tape, but then you still have that metal element. So
yeah.
Let's see what we have for other questions. Oh, someone did ask how many SKUs you have right now.
Yeah, I saw that. We have, you would probably know, I don't know the total number.
Yeah, 20.
20.
And
We have just white shoes, a slip-on and a lace-up right now. We will be doing more colors, sneak preview, and then we've just changed the back rubber tab.
Cool. We have one question about chemicals. So like any thoughts on the chemicals used to dye the polymers as well as all the processing methods?
yeah, I'll jump in and take this one. So I think this is a good question because I think it underscores the fact that sustainability is super complicated. So it's not just inputs and material inputs. It's not like saying, oh, we use like RPET, like we're sustainable now. It's like, no. Like what were the finishes? What were the dyes? There's a human and labor rights element to it as well.
Right. We didn't even have time to get into that side of your supply chain.
Crazy. So I think here you want to make, because dyes and chemicals often cause like the greatest impact, and there's a ton of water usage around dyeing, and then there's a ton of runoff. And so what we're seeing is a lot of people are transitioning to natural dyes, and there's some really fantastic companies out there that are like reimagining the amount of water used to dye indigo indigo dyes to dye denim. They're reimagining cotton dyes to use like natural inputs and renewables, vegetables, exactly, and to get a much wider range. The thing with us is that and the reason why we really walk away from leather is that a ton of leather uses chromium in like the dyeing of the treatment process, and it's like a suspected carcinogen. It's terrible for you. It causes the leather not to biodegrade. So staying away from that. It's hard because right now there isn't a ton of transparency into that. And I think what we're hoping to champion as well as sort of the end of life transparency is that beginning of supply chain transparency will continue to improve, and you'll continue to be able to say like what's your carbon impact, what's the water use, what like dyes and materials were used, and being able to kind of engage with that customers we sort of mentioned beyond point of purchase really allows for that education. It's kind of a little up.
Yeah. One thing I would just say there, like different with like our shoe and our first product line right now is our very first product line. The base material is all white. And then we actually use a corn waste resin. And so we're actually just coating the colors just on a resin. And it's a little different from when you're actually dyeing denim or when you're using like dyeing material like a linen or a cotton that actually takes a wash and different acid wash techniques, etc. And so there's a ton of research right now going into what's low water use look like, what are different ways to dye and fade and distress denim. But it's something that we're actually for a product line next year we're looking into actually having to dye fiber.
Interesting. We have another question about just like circular economy in general. How important is it to get our resources from suppliers that align with these values?
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10 important.
10 out of 10 important. Look, like, you know, we couldn't have built this product line. We couldn't have launched this brand without, you know, incredible suppliers and partners throughout the supply chain. You know, the bio leather we use, it was the 8th iteration of it for strength. And it was a huge back and forth and, you know, down to things like laces and insoles. You know, Stuart's constantly in contact with every single one of our suppliers. And right now as we're developing new product lines, it's similar. And so even when we, you know, we went through the B Corp certification program and now we're looking at doing a full or in the process of doing a product LCA, you know, buy-in from suppliers is super important.
Yeah, it's so important.
Even for us as we're trying to recapture waste throughout the supply chain to recycle, et cetera. So you're better off starting on the same page with your supplier, and incentivizing, you know, good supply chain practices.
Are there any like specific questions that you ask off the bat? Like obviously there's so many, but like some of the top questions that you ask suppliers to ensure that you want to work with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I ask for any certifications, and we need to have ISO certifications, and that's kind of a pretty standard. And if you work with any vendors in Europe, it's almost guaranteed, and a lot of them in Asia do as well. But ISO certification is huge for sustainability and for workers' rights. The other thing that we always ask for are tech sheets and material LCA. So like we need to know actually what the material is made out of, what sort of the Satra testing has it undergone, you know, like what is like the weave technique, like we need to know all of that stuff because if we get something in the supply chain that all of a sudden is different than we anticipated, like it can cause a big problem. And then the third is any material LCA that they have. And most vendors are starting to get this, like where are they sourcing their cotton? Like, do they know the water usage that where is it being trucked in somewhere? Is it being flown in somewhere? And we're able to kind of track, and these are just like very basic level kind of questions. And so those are sort of, that's been our sort of roadmap. And then what we're able to do once we get a supplier to the table that sort of checks all those boxes and pricing makes sense, we're then able to build a longer relationship and say like, hey, we're doing an LCA that we're going to put on our site. Like, want to feature you guys. What do you have available for us? And then we'll go in and we'll do further research. Or we'll say, hey, we're signing up to be a part of like ethical trading initiative or the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. And like, this is sort of like baseline where we need to know where we are. And like, these are some of the goals that we're going to have to like, you know, in part of this process, can we get you to come to the table and get involved? And so it's a ton of relationship management, but super helpful if you can kind of show them the upside to it and the benefit of it.
Yeah, great. Well, let's try to do one more question. We're getting close to the end and I know Instagram will kick us off. So another question is, are you considered or would you consider yourself a slow fashion brand?
Slow fashion is such a tricky word.
Yeah. I sat back to think about that.
We absolutely believe in slow fashion. And so, again, and we make this point a lot. Is leather bad? Like, I'm just gonna go back to leather. Is leather bad if it's the leather handbag that I'm gonna keep for 15 years and pass down to my daughter, or she's gonna pass on to her daughter, or that I'm gonna resell and it's gonna probably be resold 3 or 4 different times throughout its life cycle because there's value in the design or that brand or whatever it might be. Or is leather, like I have a leather jacket from high school that I honestly still wear. Like that is 15 years old plus, right? is that bad if it's something so durable? And it's hard to say, no, it's bad. Or, like it's hard to say leather is bad, full stop. Because we're so focused on durability. And so I would say Thousand Fell is slow fashion from the point of view that we have used durability as a design tenet for the brand. So it's been price, really trying to lower the barrier to entry to get as many people as possible to participate in circularity, aesthetic, comfort, and durability. And those were kind of the 4 tent poles that we were designing into. And from that point of view, like, we really wanted to make sure this shoe would last as long, if not longer, than mass market leather shoes. And we're also slow fashion from the sense that we will not be seasonal. We will not be doing seasonal fashion drops. We are focused on releasing, designs and styles that can be, great fashion forward classics that will last kind of 3 to 5 years. And just because you got Thousand Fell in 2020 doesn't mean it's going to go out of style and you need the new 2021 Thousand Fell.
Although we're going to be dropping some cool colors.
Although there will be colors and a couple new product lines, but never that would make the old product line out of style. And so I think, and this has been a huge conversation because of the push, the problem with spring summer collections this past year with COVID being dropped, but really this like really hyper fast fashion, 5 collections a year cycle has to end. And so I think we're in a unique position to be able to drop new colors and drop, on a different marketing cadence as well.
Yeah. And I know
you're making your own fashion calendar.
Yeah.
Yes.
Amazing. Well, I want to thank you before Instagram shuts us down. Thank you so much for sharing more about Thousand Fell. And for everyone listening and tuning in, if you want to learn more, go check out Thousand Fell on your website or your Instagram, or let us know where else.
That's perfect. We're thousandfell.com, and then we're at 1000_fell, and you can kind of see us if you're in the live. But
we didn't get kicked off yet.
Okay, amazing. We're still here.
But so great to speak with you today.
So great chatting with both of you. Thanks so much for taking the time and being the kickoff to Fashion Horror Stories.
Yeah,
Have a great
you're welcome.
month.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you. Take care.